Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Chapter 4. The Rabbit Sends in a Little Bill. It was the right rabbit, trotting slowly back again, and looking anxiously about as it went, as if it had lost something, and she heard it muttering to itself, "The Duchess! The Duchess! Oh, my dear paws! Oh, my fur and whiskers! She'll get me excited, as sure as ferrets." A ferret? Where can I drop them, I wonder? Alice guessed in a moment that he was looking for the fan and the pair of white kid gloves, and she, very good-naturedly, began hunting about for them. But they were nowhere to be seen, and everything seemed to have changed since her swim in the pond, and the great hall with glass table and the little door had vanished completely. Very soon the rabbit noticed Alice as she went hunting about, and called out to her in an angry tone, "Why, Mary Ann, what are you doing out here? Run home this minute and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan, quick now!" And Alice was so frightened that she ran off at once in the direction it pointed, without trying to explain the mistake it had made. "He took me as his housemaid," she said to herself as she ran. "How surprised he'll be when he finds out who I am! But I'd better take him his fan and gloves, that is, if I can find them." As she said this, she came upon a neat little house, on the door of which was a bright brass plate with the name W. Rabbit engraved upon it. She went in without knocking and hurried upstairs in great fear lest she meet the real Mary Ann and be turned out of the house before she had found the fan and gloves. "How queer it seems," Alice said to herself, "getting messages for a rabbit. I suppose Diana will be sending me on messages next." And she began fancying this very sort of thing that might happen. "Miss Alice, come directly here and get ready for your walk." "Coming in a minute, nurse, but I've got to see that mouse doesn't get out. Only, I don't think," Alice went on, "they'd let Diana stop in the house if it began ordering people about like that." By this time she had found her way into a tidy little room with a table in the window, and upon it, as she'd hoped, a fan and 2 or 3 pairs of tiny white kid gloves. She took the fan and the pair of gloves and was going to leave the room when her eye fell upon a little bottle that stood near the looking-glass. There was no label, this time with the words "Drink me," but nonetheless she uncorked it and put it to her lips. "I know something interesting is going to happen," she said to herself. "Whenever I eat or drink something, I'll just see where the bottle does. I do hope it makes me go larger, for I'm really quite tired of being such a tiny thing." It did indeed so, and much sooner than she had expected. Before she had drunk half the bottle, she had found her head pressing against the ceiling, and she had to stoop to save her neck from being broken. She hastily put the bottle down, saying to herself, "That's quite enough. I hope I shan't grow any more. As it is, I can't get out the door. I do wish I hadn't drunk so much." Alas, it was too late to wish. She went on growing and growing, and very soon had to kneel down on the floor, and another minute was not going to be in room for this. And she tried the effect of laying down with one elbow against the door and the other arm curled up around her head. Still she went on growing, and as a last resort put one arm out of the window and one foot up the chimney, and said to herself, "Now I can do no more. Whatever happens, what will become of me?" Luckily for Alice, the little magic bottle had now had its full effect, and she grew no larger. Still, it was very uncomfortable, and as there seemed to be no sort of chance of her ever getting out of the room again, no wonder she felt unhappy. It was much pleasanter at home, thought poor Alice, when one wasn't growing larger and smaller and being ordered about by mice and rabbits. I almost wish I hadn't gone down that rabbit hole, and yet it's rather curious, this sort of life. I do wonder what can happen to me. When I used to read about fairy tales, I fancied that kind of thing never happened, and here I am in the middle of this one. There ought to be a book written about me, and when I grow up, I'll write one. But I'm grown up now," she added in a soulful tone. "At least there's no room for me to grow in here any more." But then, thought Alice, shall I never get older than I am now? That'll be a comfort. One way, never to be an old woman, but then always to have lessons learned. I shouldn't like that. "Oh, you foolish Alice," she answered herself. "How can you learn lessons in here? Why, there's hardly any room for you, and there's no room for any lesson books." And so she went on, taking first one side, and then making a conversation of it all together. But after a few minutes, she heard a voice outside and stopped to listen. "Mary Ann, Mary Ann," said the voice. "Fetch me my gloves this minute." Then came a little pattering of feet up the stairs. Alice knew it was a rabbit coming to look for her, and she trembled till it shook the house, quite forgetting that she was about 1,000 times as large as the rabbit, and had no reason to be afraid of it. Presently the rabbit came to the door and tried to open it, but as the door opened inwards, Alice's elbow was pressed hard against it. That attempt proved a failure. Alice heard itself say, "Then I'll go round and get into the window." "That you won't," thought Alice, and after waiting, she fancied she heard the rabbit just under the window. She suddenly spread out her hand and made a snatch in the air. She did not hold of anything, but she heard a little shriek and a fall and a crash of broken glass, for which she concluded it was possible it had fallen into a cucumber frame, or something of the sort. Next there came an angry voice. The rabbit's, "Pat, Pat, where are you?" And then a voice she'd never heard before said, "Sure then I'm here, digging for apples, your honour." "Digging for apples indeed," said the rabbit angrily. "Here, come and help me out of this." Sounds of more broken glass. "Now tell me, Pat, what's that in the window?" "Sure, it's an arm, your honour." He pronounced it arm. "An arm, you goose! Who ever saw one of that size? Why, it fills the whole window." "Sure it does, your honour, but it's an arm, that for that." "Well, it's got no business there. At any rate, go and take it away." There was a long silence after this, and Alice could only hear whispers now and then, such as, "Sure, I don't like it, your honour. Oh, do as I tell you, you coward." And then at last she spread out her hand again and made another snatch in the air. This time there were 2 shrieks and more sounds of broken glass. What a number of cucumber frames they must be, thought Alice. I wonder what they'll do next. As for pulling them out of the house, I only wish they could. I'm sure I don't want to stay in here any longer. She waited for some time without hearing anything more. Then at last came a rumbling of cartwheels, and a sound of a good many voices all together. She made out the words, "Where's the other ladder?" "Well, I hadn't bring this one, but Bill's got the other." "Bill, fetch it here, lad." "Here, put it against the corner one." "No, tie them together, and first, no, they reach down high enough yet." "Oh, they'll do well enough, don't be particular." "Here, Bill, catch the eldest rope. With the roof bare. Mind that loose slat." "Oh, it's coming down, heads up." Loud crash. "Now, who did that?" "It was Bill, I fancy." "Who's gone down the chimney?" "No, shan't you do it?" "Then I won't, then." "Bill, it's up to you, go down there." "Here, Bill, the master says you got to go down the chimney." "No." "So Bill's got to go down the chimney, has he?" said Alice to herself. Shy. They seem to be putting everything on Bill. I wouldn't be in Bill's place for a good deal. This fireplace is narrow, but I think I can kick a little. She drew her foot up. She drew her foot as far down the chimney as she could, and she waited till she heard the animal. She couldn't guess what sort it was, scratching and scrambling about in the chimney close above her. Then saying to herself, "This is Bill," she gave one sharp kick and waited to see what would happen. The first she heard was a general chorus of, "There goes Bill," and then a rabbit's voice, a long, "Catch him, you by the hedge." Then silence, and then another confusion of voices. "Hold his head up. Brandy now, don't choke him. How was it, old fellow? What happened to you? Do tell us about it." Last came a feeble, squeaking voice. "That's Bill," thought Alice. "Well, I hardly know. No more, thank ye. I'm better now. I'm a good deal fussed to tell you. All I know is something gave me a right jack in the box, and I was like a skyrocker. So you did, old fella, said the others. You must burn the house down, said the rabbit's voice, and Alice called out as loud as she could, If I'll do, I'll set Diana on you. There was deadly silence instantly, and Alice thought to herself, I wonder what they'll do next. If there's any sense, they'd take the roof off. And after a minute or two, they began moving about again, and Alice heard the rabbit say, A barrowful will do to begin with. A barrowful of what? Thought Alice. But she had no longer any doubt, for the moment later a shower of pebbles came rattling onto the window, and some of them hit her in the face. I'll put a stop to this, she said to herself, and shouted, You better not do that again, which produced another sound of deadly silence. Alice noticed with some surprise that the pebbles were all turning into little cakes as they lay on the floor, and a bright idea came to her head. If I eat one of those cakes, she thought, it's sure to make something change my size. And it can't possibly make me any larger. It must make me smaller, I suppose. So she swallowed one of the cakes and was delighted to find that she was beginning to shrink again. As soon as she was small enough to get through the door, she ran out of the house and found quite a crowd of little animals and birds waiting outside. The poor little Bill was in the middle, being held up by two guinea pigs who were giving it something out of the bottle. They all made a rush at the moment Alice appeared. She ran off as hard as she could and found herself safe in the thick wood. The first thing I've got to do, said Alice to herself, as she wandered about in the wood, is grow to my right size, and then the second thing is to find my way out into my lovely garden. I think that will be the best plan. I sounded an excellent plan, no doubt, and very neatly and simply arranged. The only difficulty was, not only she had the smallest idea how to set about it, and while she was peering about anxiously among the trees, a small little sharp bark just over her head made her look around in a great hurry. An enormous puppy was looking down at her with large round eyes and feebly scratching on one paw, trying to touch her. Poor little thing, said Alice in a coaxing tone, and she tried to whistle to it, but she was terribly frightened all the time that it might be hungry, in case of which she most likely eat her up in spite of her coaxing. Hardly knowing what she'd do, she picked up a little bit of a stick and held it up to the puppy, whereupon the puppy jumped up into the air on all of its feet at once with a yelp of delight and rushed at the stick and made to begin to believe to worry it. Then Alice dodged behind a great thistle to keep herself away from being run over, and at that moment she peered on the other side. The puppy made another rush at the stick and tumbled head over heels in a hurry to get hold of it. Then Alice, thinking it was more like to have a game of play with the horse cart and expect any moment to be trampled under its feet, ran around the thistle again. Then the puppy began a series of short charges at the stick, running very little way forwards each time and then a long way back, and then barking hoarsely all the while, till at last it sat down a good way off, panting with its tongue hanging out of its mouth and its great eyes half shut. That's dog panting, by the way. This seemed to make Alice a good opportunity for making her escape, so at once she set off and ran until she was quite tired and out of breath, and until the puppy's bark sounded quite faint in the distance. And yet what a dear puppy it was, said Alice, as she leant against a buttercup to rest herself, and warmed herself with one of the leaves. I should have liked teaching it tricks very much, if only I'd been the right size to do it. Oh dear, I've nearly forgotten that I've got to grow up again. Let's see, how is it managed? I suppose I ought to eat or drink something or other, but the great question is what? Great question certainly was what? Alice looked all around her at the flowers and the blades of grass, but she didn't see anything that looked like the right thing to eat or drink under the circumstances. There was a large mushroom growing near her and about the same height as herself, and when she looked under it, and on both sides and behind it, it occurred to her that she might as well look and see what was on top of it. She stretched herself on her tiptoes and peered over the edge of the mushroom, and her eyes immediately met those of a large caterpillar that was sitting on top with its arms folded, smoking a quiet hookah, and not taking the slightest notice of her or of anything else at all.